Hello and welcome, folks. Welcome to a special edition of MOTH News Live. I'm Keith Walsh, and today we are diving into the recent incident in Carlow. A young man entered a shopping centre, fired shots into the air, and tragically took his own life. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt, though a young girl did sustain a minor injury while fleeing the scene. But almost immediately, social media was flooded with unverified claims, multiple shooters, several fatalities, and various other unfounded stories. The speed and spread of misinformation was staggering. Joining me today is Politicorey. His name is Corey. You can find him on social media at Politicorey, he'd made a video, a very candid video, just dissecting these false narratives, and it struck a chord with many. A lot of people viewed it. We used to say it went viral. We'll discuss what actually happened, how misinformation proliferates so rapidly, and why it is crucial to rely on verified information. Please. We'll also touch on a similar situation in Liverpool, where a car drove into a crowd during a victory parade, leading to injuries, and once again, a flurry of online speculation. Corey was also showing this live on his TikTok. There are some questions coming in, just in case it looks a bit odd. He's also live on his TikTok account at the time of recording. Do get in touch if you have a story that you'd like to share with us. And I will have a question popping up on the screen in just a little while. And don't forget, you can watch all of our old interviews, past interviews and shows on MOTH_news, all caps, MOTH_news on our YouTube channel. So go and knock yourself out. Right, let's get into it with Corey talking about
that said. You made a video about the fake news that followed, or it's mostly far right people looking to get clicks because they want to further their agenda. They wanted to be a brown person. They wanted to be a terror attack. And you made a video about it, and it got a huge response.
Sure, yeah. So I think a lot of this stuff has to be framed in terms of, I think, the incentive structures that exist currently for reporting on things like this. So, I mean, it's been bad the last number of years. I think I always say that since COVID, something happened anyway with the we all went online. There was a huge explosion in the benefit of being a content creator and talking about these things. And one of the most important aspects to the algorithm and success as a content creator is timely news, catching things on the upswing when people care about them, when people are looking for these things up and trying to find more information from them. And so the incentive is there to report on these things within, the minutes and hours after they occur. And if you have a, suspect relationship with true journalism or corroborating sources or doing any of these sort of things, or if you believe that, the sources from the mainstream media aren't to be trusted, then you don't care about putting information out there that may be correct or incorrect. You just care about getting whatever you can out there as soon as possible so that you, again, catch the upswing. Within an hour or two of the incident happening, I think somebody mentioned it to me because they had seen it on Google. I just saw so many videos of people trying to cover the story, and the story ranging from there was one gunman who shot 7 people, then it was a gunman who shot 9 people, killed 1 and shot a 9-year-old girl in the leg. Like, obviously all these numbers are getting mixed up. I presume somebody got 9 shots from a 9-year-old girl. Then there was the idea that there was 2 shooters and the armed guards killed 1 and another one got away, and that's why there was a helicopter out looking for them. And it was just an explosion of nonsense and lies. And there was no consideration given to the fact of who the person was to begin with. Obviously, a lot of these people came out with the eyebrow raised. I wonder, what this person's name is going to be. I wonder if we're all going to be surprised by who committed this, act of violence. And then, of course, it turns out that it's unfortunately a 22-year-old young Irish man who's obviously suffering somewhat and had some trouble with the law previously, and it didn't matter because once the truth comes out, they cover, this is what the latest things that are being said are, and there's no accountability or consequence for the stuff that they put out initially. And sometimes this stuff can seem innocuous or like it doesn't have a huge consequence, but I think the machine and the mechanism and the incentives that exist and how often these things are being misreported across the globe has created such a huge environment of lack of trust in any information sources. Nobody knows what's going on, and a terrible democratizing of the gatekeepers of information. So I just think it's a very big fast track to nowhere. I think if we don't have some sort of mitigation strategy at some point for this, either through some sort of reprimanding within the apps themselves, if you put this stuff out, whether there's some like EU legislation, whether there's some sort of sanctions on the these platforms themselves, or they don't police these things properly, I think eventually it's going to come to a head where it'll be something far more extreme. Like we saw the riots in Dublin. Information travels very, very quickly. Once, the person who stabbed that poor girl in Dublin in Parnell Square, it turned out was, a mentally ill asylum seeker, refugee. Information travels so quickly, and suddenly there was a mob tearing things apart, and that's all it takes. So all we're waiting for is the next big event like that, where these people will share this information within an hour, incite people to huge amounts of hatred and violence. And to me, it's only going to get worse. And then the more this happens, the more people turn away from mainstream media, the more it creates this environment that we're worried about. And it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's something that I'm really, really concerned about.
Yeah, a couple of comments there. You're probably seeing them from a guy called Niall, who's saying it took RT 3 hours to report on it. He's also saying not everybody's far right. People are just frightened. Niall, I will put it to you that people are frightened because of the likes of Derek Bly coming out. The reason RT took 3 hours is because they have to verify the facts. They have to talk to the Gardaí. The Gardaí won't release the information until they're sure what happened. There's so many protocols that have to happen before you can put news out. It's not like RT are holding back. It's not like Derek Bly is not getting on TikTok and going, I've got the truth, that I'm saying the things that mainstream media won't cover. I mean, that's what he says, but that's not what he's doing. What he's doing is putting out totally made up shit. Like, I'm not an RT apologist, I have my own issues with RT, but this is not one of them. And like, people are scared, Niall, and if you don't see that the reason people are scared is not because RTE aren't putting out news quickly enough, it's because people like Derek Bly or that guy Daz, who said 9 were killed and 7 injured, like almost like within minutes of it happening or whenever he found out about it, they're the people that are frightening anyone that's frightened. It's not asylum seekers, it's not refugees, whatever you want to call them. This is a problem. This is the problem, and that's why we need to talk about it. Niall says, that's actually, you know what? Niall says, I understand your points there, lad. So I think that's fair enough. Thank you very much. But this is the very thing. It's about getting the fake news out there, frightening people, making it about foreigners. They've got a racist agenda, and it works. But I wonder, is this one too, like, this one is so blatantly, obviously, like, wrong, and people will eventually pick up their paper and go, what? A girl hurt herself running away, which is terrible. I'm sure the girl was terribly frightened. It was a poor, not well man who ended his life in the most public way. And people will see that, and then surely they're going to go back and go, all right, well, this guy Bly, this guy Dad, these guys are full of shit. And now I know it, because there's other times where they say things with subtle differences and you're not quite sure, but this one is so stark. It's got to, whatever they're, I mean, actually, you can tell me, you said it about what they say about mainstream media. This must ruin their credibility with regards to telling the truth.
Yeah, I think we're in a situation with a lot of this stuff where there exists your team, so it's super polarized. So I think people who would be skeptical of these news sources to begin with would look at this and say, here's an example of how they were egregiously wrong and why nobody should listen to them, like I would say as well. But I think a lot of the people that are in their camp and that are people who don't trust the mainstream media whatsoever and wouldn't listen to anything they say, I think they just chalk it up to, lads, you had your sources, you got this one wrong. It was a crazy situation. The news was flying around, but you get it right next time. 90% of the time you're correct. So again, it's another societal issue, I think, where we're in these like different cults, and you can argue, for me, I have a lot of trust in the mainstream media in terms of the requirements to report on information, what they have to actually do, journalistic standards, the things that go into actually reporting a story and having it go live under one of these banners. And so that's my camp, and I really believe in that. But then you have these people who, even if their favorite independent media source gets it wrong, it's not going to break them out of their situation. To be honest, it's rare that uncovering the truth of a situation breaks somebody out of the spell that they're in terms of the beliefs that they may have. So again, I really think it has to be. I don't even know if you can tackle it with misinformation with information, because as I said, once you're in that camp and once you're praying at that altar of independent media, and at least as it pertains to these guys, I don't think there's any information you can give somebody to break them out of it. So I think this needs to be legislative level. There needs to be some sort of sanctions at the platform level. I'm not sure how that would look. I'd have to think about it more. I'm sure people come up with pretty good ideas, but we just have to find a way to stop this information from getting out so fast, from spreading so quickly, and from so many people picking it up. And I think that's the only solution that we have.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you were only it's only a matter of time before. I mean, look at the riots that happened on Parnell Street, and what happened after that incident. So I mean that will happen again. It could happen again, and look, people will be arrested. There will be.
It will happen again, yeah, 100%.
But there will be consequences. So that's why it's important that these people aren't allowed just put this any old bile. Now, in case anybody's watching this and thinking, here's a couple of mainstream media shills. I'm not, as convinced as Corey is about, and we have a difference of opinion. The reason MOTH News exists, and the reason I like talking to someone like Corey, is because I like to talk to people who are into data, and you're into data, so you'd like to look for the facts. Whatever you're reading, you won't just read the headline, or you won't just read the first story you come across. You'll go, oh, this looks interesting, but also I'm going to have a look at this, and I'm not just going to be fed something by somebody when I'm not sure what it is. That's what it's all about. The mainstream media do fall down a lot of ways, and on MOTH News we've brought you stories where they will just blatantly not report on stuff or whatever, and that's why we are here to fill in the gaps. But we're also not here to promote fake news. We're here to talk about the truth. So we're only here because if mainstream media aren't telling you the truth, sometimes you see a story, the headline says one thing, but if you actually read the last paragraph, the actual cut and thrust of the story is something completely different, and they've shaped it in a way that suits their agenda. And we have mainstream media outlets that that side with different political parties, etc., etc. It's always been so you just have to be careful. So I just wanted to say that so people watching aren't going, these guys just they're just talking, they're furthering mainstream media agenda. That's not the case. We're just trying to have an open conversation about this and talk about how dangerous it is. It's funny that this has happened so quickly after the Liverpool incident, because it really, I'm not sure how they're going to twist this one in Ireland, our friend Derek and his pals. But when the identity of the driver of the car in that terrible Liverpool incident happened, when his identity came out, first of all, people were saying all sorts. And then when the truth came out, then the conspiracy theories start. And then they say, well, actually, then they just lie. They just keep lying and lying until people believe that it's something other than the fact that, he wasn't a brown, a guy, an asylum seeker, whatever you wanted him to be, driving the car. End of.
Yeah, I think that, again, the biggest problem I see is the axioms that basically people are working with. So they're fundamental core beliefs that you go into reading a news story with. And I would say the mainstream media, while they certainly have flaws, it is impossible to describe the distance and how much better they are than the majority of independent media, because most independent media don't take an accountability or a consequence to the things that they say. For the most part, there are things that certainly mainstream media, depending on what source you're looking at, may choose not to report on something for a particular bias or for a specific agenda. But in general, when editorial mainstream media report on something, obviously we're talking about mainstream media sources that I would consider pretty high regard: BBC, RT News, AP, Reuters, these ones. In general, that information is going to be correct. You're almost never going to be told a lie by one of these sources. Now, as I said, they may shape an opinion. They may choose to report on something or not report on something based on the agenda even Fox News and these, what I would say are more biased news sources, their editorial stuff, when they report on an actual news story, for the most part, it's correct, because, as I said, they have journalistic standards they have to follow. The problem is, for the most part, people have their core beliefs, and when it comes to the Liverpool incident or Carlow or anything else, when these people hear a story like this, they're straight away they've been told by all of these people for months, and at this point, coming on years, that there's people coming into this country from war-torn countries, refugees and asylum seekers, who are dangerous, who are a threat to civilization, and that anytime any major incident happens where an Irish person or otherwise is under threat, has been assaulted or otherwise, it has to have been one of these people, because Irish people don't commit crimes and don't, cause violence to anybody. And so if you go into it with that core belief, it takes a huge amount of convincing for somebody to think it wasn't, someone from the Middle East that went and got in a car and drove through a bunch of people. And we can talk about where that core belief comes from. Obviously, for the most part, when you hear stories about somebody driving a car into a crowd of people, it has been Islamists who have been doing, committing this kind of crime. So you can understand the core belief. But again, you have to have objectivity when it comes to news stories. And if you believe at the start that it has to be somebody from the Middle East or an asylum seeker or otherwise, and then you're looking for this information within an hour from these independent media sources that are going to corroborate your beliefs, it's just going to further cement these core beliefs that you have. And the more that the mainstream media diverges from what you already believe has to be true, the less you're going to trust them, and the harder it is to bring them back into the fold. So again, I always advocate complete objectivity when going into these things. Everybody has their biases. Everybody will have, when they hear a story, will initially think something, and they may think that, that probably was this, that probably was that. But you have to wait till the truth comes out, and you have to believe in the systems that we have raised to the status, of believing the things that they come out with, that they have systems in place that corroborate the information they're sharing. And just the loss of that is I think the big problem here.
Yeah, I mean, like, people say, like, how can RT be impartial when they've been bailed out by the government, and then you bring that on to, well, the government, are bringing these immigrants in because they want to form a super army that are going to, because there's going to be a war, and these Algerian people aren't actually refugees; they're soldiers that are going to be part of this army when the war kicks off, and all these kind of conspiracy theories that happen. But if that's, as you said, if that is what you're going in to read these stories, if you have that. If that's the angle you're going at, then it all seems fine. It all seems believable. But like this idea that we need to keep our women safe from people from other countries, we need to keep, like, they're hanging around playgrounds. There's, like, you can't go on hearsay and like, let me just tell you something, guys. Most people, if you're looking to keep young girls and children and women safe in this country, most women and young people are assaulted, sexually or otherwise, by somebody they know, right? So, like, you're talking about 95+% of assaults on women and children in this country are perpetrated by somebody they know, a husband, a boyfriend, a son, an uncle, whatever. And if you say it's 95%, like, so it's mostly, like, way, like, I can't even, like, I don't know what, it's so high in the percentage of it being Irish people that if you are actually interested in keeping people safe, minding our children in playgrounds, all that kind of stuff, then you've got to look closer to home. It's absolute horseshit, and you're not helping the situation, and you're not helping children and women. All you're doing is promoting racism and a right-wing agenda. End of story. And this is the problem. This is why this has to be dealt with.
Yeah, and one of the biggest problems as well, I think, is that it's really counterintuitive to, if you're somebody who is concerned about whatever negative externalities come about from the level of immigration to the country, of which there are problems, 100%, having and upholding these people who completely miss the point and completely focus on the wrong issues and misreport and mischaracterize these people is actually doing far more harm to you actually having a solution. Because if you're spending all this time amped up and angry about things that don't exist, these threats that are fake, then you're not actually directing your anger towards the systems that are leading to so many asylum seekers coming here and sleeping on the streets and not having accommodations, and then not having houses for Irish people. And obviously immigration impacts that. But where does the fault lie? with these people. If these people that are coming in here, sure, you may have some, that are claiming asylum erroneously or otherwise, but then you should want the system to be fixed. This focus on this, scary enemy from somewhere far away, it just misses the point completely. And it's a human instinct. We're tribal people, and I get where the feeling might come from, but we have to focus on the issues. And again, there are a bunch of issues, there are a bunch of things that we could solve as it pertains to the problems that come about through immigration for this country, and ways that we can improve the asylum seeker process. But we never talk about those. We never actually identify, this is the problem, this is how we fix it, or here's some ideas how to fix it. Who are the politicians or elected representatives that are championing these ideas? I should vote for them. I should give them power. I should allow, the idea to take place. But it's not that, because again, they don't believe in the system. They've lost faith in all these systems. And so they think they need to take to the streets and they need to drive the people out themselves. So again, that's what I think is one of the biggest problems with this, is when they miss the point entirely and all their anger is directed in the wrong way. We actually never fix the real problems that are causing the harm that they're experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, like we had a situation where there was 2 marches on the same day. Both were marching kind of, one was pretty much a right-wing, like nationalist right-wing, anti-immigration march, and the other was kind of like anti that march. And meanwhile, the government are going, this is great, lads, because we don't actually have to fix any of the problems now, because everything is directed at somebody else. If you want to talk about asylum seekers, and you want to talk about, a problem with asylum seekers coming to this country, you need to look at who owns the IPAS centres. And this is something we've reported on MOTH News, and you can look back on your videos on YouTube and X or wherever. You need to look at who's running the IPAS centres. There's an IPAS centre in Tipperary, in a small town called Dundrum, that's absolutely ruined that village. Not because of the people that are staying it's because of the person who's running it. He's getting 2 million a month from the government. There's no oversight. So the people that are staying there don't want to be there. The protesters outside are protesting about the treatment of the people inside for the most part. I mean, you're going to get the odd right-wing person in there. I spoke to an asylum seeker who stayed in this IPAS centre. She told me her story, and it was absolutely diabolical the way she was being treated. There was nowhere she could turn to get justice. She was being denied. Her daughter was stopped from using the school bus. She was denied water. They have to pay for water. All these things that are being this is people, Irish people, certainly white businessmen or businesswomen, who are coining it, who are getting like 2 million a month is what this guy gets for this IPAS centre. And that's the problem. And if you look at the problem with homelessness and you look at the problem with the IPAS centre, where do people go after the IPAS centre? Well, they're probably homeless. And what do they do after that? Well, then you've got these homeless centres, a lot of the times run by the same people. There doesn't seem to be, until we face up to the facts and look at what the problem is and talk about the actual problem, as long as we allow ourselves to be misdirected by racists, then the government are never going to be forced to deal with all of this money we're spending. I mean, look at the difference in what the government would have spent a few years ago on asylum seekers and immigration. You're talking about from a few million to hundreds of millions, and all of that money is going to Irish people for the most part, white Irish businessmen who are running those places into the ground, ruining towns, and getting away with it scot-free because all these useful idiots, gobdaws, are talking about people who have a different skin color than them. And that's the truth. So that's why it's important that we talk about these things.
Correct. Yeah, I just think that, again, there are a ton of downstream effects, negative consequences at the current level of immigration to the country. And as you correctly said, a lot of those are structural problems. They're problems with access. Basically, they're exacerbating problems that exist in the country already. So we already have a housing crisis. The housing crisis is born of a lack of returning to the level of house building that we had before the financial crash in 2008. So this has been building for a long, long time. Obviously, we're going through an immigration crisis now, after the Ukraine war, and then, more people kind of coming here as a second or third safe landing spot from the Middle East and from Northern Africa. But these are problems that existed already. So the HSE already had a problem with access of beds and space. The housing, schooling, all these things were all problems that existed, and they're all getting exacerbated by the problem. And I do think that there's an issue currently with the asylum seeker process, in that if you can get here and you can claim asylum, the red tape and the bureaucracy involved in actually processing these is way too long. It's way too resource heavy. And as you said, in the meantime, they've basically removed planning regulations and laws for anybody that wants to build anything that can be considered an IPAS center, which is basically just firing a lot of beds into any sort of building that has 4 walls and a roof. And these people are making a fortune off. They're charging, hotel stay prices per night for these people to stay in dire accommodation. They have to provide very, very little in terms of any sort of accommodations outside of that. And it's costing the state an absolute fortune. And all of this stuff could be, seen ahead of time. So again, I think that's what we should be out protesting. We should be looking for policy changes. The EU Migration Pact made an attempt to address some of these things. But again, even the conversation around that, it's never around the facts of the contents of the EU Migration Pact for these people, the people that I'm talking about, that pump all this misinformation out there and get people angry, but don't ever give them a solution to the problem. To these people, because it came from the EU, it has to be, thrown out of hand. And their idea, effectively, is close the borders to the country entirely. Now, I don't know how that would work with North and South, but, they don't go into detail because they don't have any detail. And basically, I presume they want to form militias to, shove these people off the cliffs of Moher and just, push them out of the country. I don't know what their solution is to the kind of existing problem, the systems that are in place. But again, these people never have solutions because they don't need to have solutions that actually work or are pragmatic. All they care about is riling people up, putting stories out that get a ton of attention and a ton of eyeballs, make people super, super angry, and they get to sit back and laugh at the fact that they're getting, their clicks and their views for the day. So again, these people people are looking to, they're never going to have a solution for your problem. All they're going to do is make you angry, and they're actually going to point you in the wrong direction. The reality is the only thing that's ever solved anything in any country is progress in the way of policy, regulation, electing people. Votes work. If there's politicians that are championing causes that you care about, if you vote, they actually get in there. The problem we have in this country, the reason things have stayed so static and things move so slow, and as much as for the most part in the terms of the political landscape, I don't have a lot of the same problems with the Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil parties as a lot of people do, but I think they rest on their merits way too much because they get voted in every time by the same voting bloc with the same interests. And the people who care about change in this country, they never actually get out and force change. Sinn Féin always rise to the top of the opinion polls after a general election, after they've lost. And it's like a classic move. They go up to the top, and then right before the general elections, they're down again. And it's the same 2 parties that get in. So we don't ever see change. For me, I voted for the Social Democrats as my first preferences, because I think it's very important that you have a party in there, minority or otherwise, that are pushing these big government parties that always seem to get in there to actually make some changes and be bold and represent a different segment of the country. But until that happens, until people actually choose the right way to see change, until they stop, deifying these people on TikTok who have absolutely no, basis for any sort of reverence whatsoever, then nothing's ever going to change. You're going to be perpetually angry, and the same people who are voting for, the people that are forming the government are always going to get what they want, which is, generally people who are homeowners, generally people who are more well off in the country, people who aren't living beside IPAS centres and aren't dealing with this sort of stuff. And that's just the way it's going to be. So if that's the way you want it, continue doing things exactly as you've always done them. If you want things to change, maybe engage with some of the systems that are in place for change.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to have a conspiracy theory, how about this for a conspiracy theory that people right-wing people are, maybe they're paid by the government to do the things they're doing so that the attention is taken off what the government are doing. I mean, I don't believe that, but I'm saying let's come up with a conspiracy theory that's helpful. Obviously, you're going to have the odd asylum seeker who isn't well mentally because of they're coming from a lot of the time dreadful circumstances, and we're landing them in terrible circumstances. They're not coming over here and just driving their new car that they just picked up from outside the social welfare office. Driving the new car up every Friday to collect their money and send it all home to the family. But none of these things are true, and if the people who are making money off of all of this are very happy and they don't want to change. And as long as we keep allowing that to happen, then, as you said, we're never going to solve it. And if you want to look at other countries where this has happened before, it's a classic playbook, you know, the othering of others, you know, picking out a section of society, you know, the Jewish people, for instance, let's take them. You other a bunch of people, you make them the problem. I think the reason they picked on the Jews in Germany is because they had a lot of money and they were able to take all their gold and belongings and all that kind of stuff. And that's ultimately what happened there. But there's always an agenda, and it's never about community. And I'll tell you one thing, forget about the color of someone's skin. It's always about class. It's always about the people with money wanting to make more money like they're not housing Irish people. They're not housing anybody. Like this is a class issue. It's not the color of skin issue. So, you know, so if you're living in a house and you're on a waiting list, you're the same as someone who's just come here from another country. You're both being treated terribly. And that's the truth. And it's just so unhelpful. And that when something like that happens in Carlow, people like Derek Blythe come on and talk about 7 people being shot and, you know, Bruce Willis in a helicopter and fucking, you know, some man in a bulldozer, you know, you could say anything. I'm sure he just makes stories up. I mean, I know he just totally makes stories up. So, you know, nothing needs to happen for him to just talk absolute bullshit anyway, you know?
Well, it's the classic playbook from all of these fascistic nations of the past. You've referenced Nazi Germany in the 40s. You know, you look at Hungary today. You look at the United States increasingly. It's always the same thing. It's like dispelling, removing faith in mainstream media, removing faith in the courts, removing faith in these institutions of fact-finding like academia or science or any of these things. The whole idea is you can't trust any of them. All you can trust is me and the people that support me. And that's what these guys try and do. They try and create this center. Derek Blythe is a perfect example, talking about how the media can't be trusted, the government can't be trusted, the courts can't be trusted, all of this kind of conspiratorial thinking. But don't worry, follow me. I'll tell you the truth and I'll tell you how to get somewhere. But I guarantee you, nobody who follows any of these people has ever seen their life improve in any meaningful way through the advice they've been given or through following them. All that's ever happened is their life has gotten worse. They've probably gotten more depressed, more anxious, more upset, and more stressed about things that would never otherwise affect them because they have access to this information now that they would never normally be exposed to, that would have no impact on their life whatsoever, no meaningful change whatsoever. But now they're obsessed about it. They're obsessed about, you know, attacks happening in villages, or like we spoke about previously, women being kidnapped by 5 migrants and then escaping into a pub. But, oh, actually, that's not what happened. And, you know, don't worry about that. We all got it wrong, but we're never going to come back and actually explain that we were wrong or retract it, or, you know.
Or no, well, that didn't happen, but something similar happened somewhere else, I heard.
Yeah, exactly. Or it was wrong this time, but it happens most of the time. Or like I said, you know, when we spoke previously as well, you know, the woman who falsely accused a migrant of SA, and then when she admitted that she lied, she said, oh, well, I did it because I know what's happening, and so I need to try and push the conversation further, and I was happy to, you know, to be the martyr in terms of that. And again, all this comes from when you don't believe in any of the institutions that exist for information gathering or for governance or for anything else, and you start to follow these individuals who have no accountability. They're not beholden to anybody, and all they want to do is increase their power, increase their reach, and increase the focus that they have on them. So I'm a strong advocate for a lot of these systems, probably more so than even you know, judging by the conversations we've had. And I think for the most part, a lot of these people are trying their best, even in government, to deliver what they think people want. But remember, everyone has an incentive structure. The government are incentivized to act out the will of the people that vote for them and that actually put them into their seats. So if you want to see change, you have to get out there and you have to vote for these people and stop giving up and stop just deciding that, you know, it's pointless, nothing can ever change, because things can absolutely change, but it just takes energy, focus in the right direction.
And I would say, you know, I don't hold your, I don't completely agree with you, but I would also look at, like, the problems in this country are the institutions, like, you know, care system, you know, how we treat our own people. Like, if you want to talk about mental health, you want to talk about issues, you want to talk about looking after women, you want to talk about looking after children or whatever, or looking after men, look at the care system and look at how people are treated, and then look at how people are treated when they look for answers. Look at the mother and baby homes. Look at, what happened during COVID and how people died without their family, and the dreadful things happen. And, there's loads of reasons, there's staff shortage, etc., etc. And that's not the problem. The problem is that when they go to the government and they go, we want answers, the government calls a witch hunt. They won't deal with them, and they won't own up because they're worried about, there's open the floodgates, everyone will want money, and they have a big problem with the way the government deal with, whistleblowers or people that are going, look, this happens. So many people have been traumatized by the HSE in this country that it's actually, in my book, officially broken, and they just keep making it worse and worse and worse. And if we look at the recent incident of the hip operations, and the HSE tried to fix the problem by setting up this call. There was a number you could call, and you could speak to a professional, and they'll tell you what the story is and what you need to do and where you need to go. And these people on the phones were supposed to be nurses, and it turns out, thanks to a whistleblower, that actually they just got people from an agency and told them to pretend they're nurses. So these institutions do not help themselves because, and I'm not saying it's necessarily the government. I do believe in voting and getting the right people in there, but we have a problem in this country with the institution protecting itself, throwing money at it, paying lawyers. I've done a video on how much money is spent by institutions defending themselves rather than talking to people, finding out what the problem is and fixing them. We have a big problem with institutions defending themselves and spending our money defending themselves over the care of Irish people, and that is a big issue. And the government, and that's where I would have a problem with the government. And maybe it's a thing that once you get in there, that actually the civil servants are the problem.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend a whole conversation talking about that. I don't necessarily. I think what you're saying, the points you're bringing up are valid and fair, but I don't think they're representative or reflective of the systems overall. I think in general, a lot of the people that work on these systems are doing their best, including the government officials, to deliver for the Irish people and deliver people in Ireland in general. And I think for the most part they do. I think if you look at any of the measurements for what makes a good country, I think Ireland is at the top for, a lot of them. We have our problems. A lot of the problems that we face are the same problems faced by all of the Western nations in the world. So whether you talk about healthcare, whether you talk about housing, these are problems that nobody really has been able to solve in the 21st century because of, the improvements to
I'd say have a look at what Norway do.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could do Norway, but then, do people want to pay 50-60% of their income in taxes? I would be all for that.
We could not. I mean, look, there's so much money being wasted on defending institutions, paying out hand over fist for iPass Centre, for temporary accommodation for young people in care, and it's creating so many problems down the track. And if we go back to mental health and all that kind of stuff, everything is you're talking about all these isolated instances. Well, that's just that. But actually, if you bring it all together, lots of things are broken, and that's a problem. And I do think that there's a lot of people in the government that are. I'm not saying they don't want to do the right thing, but it's hard for them to fix. And they go in with the best intentions, and then they realize, oh God, I can't do anything here, and they have to backtrack, and that is a problem. And I wouldn't necessarily lay that at the door of a new TD coming in, but there's a systematic. There's just but look, we'll agree to disagree, and it's good to talk with you. So to prevent this happening, you think that we talked before about putting your passport up to have an account, or you're not allowed. Maybe there should be something, some sort of AI thing where if somebody is talking about some news that there's got to be I mean even X do a fact check thing, don't they, if it's ridiculously wrong?
Look, all of this stuff is super difficult because either way, on either side of the aisle, you're going to have some sort of negative consequence. So obviously you want people to have the freedom to speak. You don't want, and particularly the whole conversation around misinformation is who decides what's misinformation. And if you have a party, for example, I always apply this filter to whenever I think about implementing something. So would I want this system or this tool to exist if the people in power were people that I really disagree with? So if you had a fascist government and they were able to, 1984, the information spread on TikTok about, their dealings, or, maybe their attacking of the courts, or whatever else. And because this law was in place, they could deem all this stuff as misinformation and they could, delete it from the web. I completely get that anxiety. So this stuff is difficult. Identification for social media accounts would help in terms of, harassment and the spreading of lies for sure. The mechanism by, an AI that identifies what's true, what's, not, might work for stuff that is like factually in the, like I know COVID had a lot of that stuff. We have and as you said on X, you have that, I can't remember what it's called, not on X.
Grok.
But the thing that comes under the tweets where people will actually suggest, or they'll say this isn't true, and a bunch of people will.
You can ask to fact check
something like that. So those things work when there's like actual facts on the ground that you can compare to. The problem that with this stuff is it's before facts have been announced. These guys, when they're talking about 7 people shot, 1 person dead, in the chaos of it all, we don't know if it's true or not. So in that moment in time, it's hard to go and say, okay, that video needs to be taken down or struck off the internet or whatever. But that's why I think with a lot of this stuff, I don't know if it's something that has to happen after the fact. If there's some sort of slap on the wrist for reporting on stuff before something's like verifiably announced as news. I'm not sure how you do it. I have to think about it. But all I know is either way, we're in a bad spot. So we're either going to have to curtail some level of liberty and some level of freedom. And this is always the duality, right? Like security and freedom. These are the 2 pillars often that, when you dial one up, you're going to dial one down. And it's about finding the balance. I just think we've hit a point now where we're at critical velocity. And if we don't do something to try and curtail some of this, even if it's like social pressure or like social pushing back on these things, or that this kind of, maybe we don't need legislation, but there has to be some sort of way of. But again, I don't know, because everything's so fractured that you have half the population that think these guys are preaching the truth, and then you have half who think it's a complete lie. And then how do you apply social pressure that way? Again, these things are really, really complicated. All I know is right now, social media platforms are like runaway trains, that there's just so much. It was always, Facebook was always notoriously bad for it, but it was like stupid memes, or it was the guys from Home Alone, like a meme about how they were going around door to door, like your granny might share it by accident thinking it was like a real thing or whatever. That was like the misinformation before. Now it's just on a different level. So I don't know. I think we need a bunch of smart people to come together and try and figure out at least something. It doesn't have to be complete wiping out of everything, because there has to be room for satire and for critical commentary and all these things as well. And the lines can be blurred between these things, but we need something. We need some sort of pressure the other way.
And I'd have to push back a little bit on you saying that, well, and I think the government say this a lot, like, well, are you happy to pay more taxes? Like, if we look at when the most social houses were built in this country, it's when we had no money in the 50s and 60s, and we built houses, we found a way, and we do have a lot of money at the moment, and I just think I just think we're not putting enough pressure on the government to do the things that they need to do. And I think this country doesn't care for asylum seekers, it doesn't care for people in lower socioeconomic communities, and it doesn't care for our vulnerable and people who need. You look at the girl who stood outside the government Leinster House for 50 hours because she wasn't getting the care she needed as an autistic. As a person with autism. So, I just think there's a problem with caring for people in general in this country at the moment. And I think lots of people in this country are making a lot of money out of that at the moment. That would be my issue. But we'll leave it at that. Can I just mention to your followers, Corey, if you don't mind, if anybody wants to see any of the videos we've made and people we talked to about like the care system or issues with government, we've some interviews with TDs there as well. You can go to MOTH_news on YouTube or follow us on X at MOTH News. And I guarantee it, very, very little. There's a few conspiracy theories in there, but very, very few. There's no conspiracy theories. It's all fact. We have our own journalists. It's okay.
Fair play. Yeah, no, thanks, Keith, for joining. Definitely check him out. And thanks everyone for hopping on. We'll try and do this more often. Try and do some sort of